What happens when Hollywood royalty walks into a talk show expecting a lighthearted, friendly chat, only to be met by a host who believes she can tear down a beloved icon? What unfolded that morning on The View was nothing short of a masterclass in composure, wit, and poetic justice. It was one of those moments that remind everyone watching why certain names in Hollywood aren't just famous. They're legendary. Because when Robert Downey Jr. took his seat across from Joy Behar, he wasn't just another celebrity guest promoting a movie. He was a man who had rebuilt his life from the ashes, and he was not about to let anyone, not even a seasoned talk show host, define his story for him. The tension began subtly. The studio lights beamed down on a polished stage, the audience humming with anticipation as cameras panned across the smiling faces of The View's co-hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin. But all eyes were fixed on the entrance. The moment Robert Downey Jr. walked in, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The applause was thunderous, almost deafening. It wasn't just the clapping of hands. It was a wave of affection and respect. To that audience, Downey wasn't just Iron Man, he was redemption personified. A man who had been through the darkest tunnels and emerged stronger, wiser, and infinitely more human. Robert greeted the crowd with his trademark charm, confident yet humble, playful yet poised. He waved, flashed that disarming grin, and slid effortlessly into his chair. "Good to be here," he said, his tone light as though he had no idea what was about to come. Whoopi leaned forward with a smile, ready to dive into questions about his upcoming film. The energy was warm, professional, easygoing, until Joy Behar spoke. Well, she began, her voice dripping with that signature mix of sarcasm and smugness. "Look who decided to grace us with his presence. Robert Downey Jr., the man who thinks he can do no wrong." The room went still. The applause tapered off, replaced by an uneasy quiet. Whoopi blinked in surprise. Sarah shifted awkwardly, and Alyssa cast a quick glance at the producers offstage. It was clear to everyone that Joy wasn't in the mood for small talk. Her opening line wasn't a joke, it was a jab. Downey's expression faltered for the briefest of moments. Then just as quickly, his composure returned. He leaned back, hands folded loosely in his lap, his eyes calm and assessing. "Good morning, Joy," he said evenly with that slow, deliberate cadence he was known for. "That's quite the warm welcome. Did I miss something? Or are we starting with the hard questions today?" The audience chuckled softly, half out of amusement, half out of nervousness. Joy smirked, sensing she had struck a nerve. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, clearly savoring the control she believed she had over the moment. "Oh, I think we both know why you're really here, Robert," she said, her tone suddenly sharp. "This isn't just about promoting your latest project, is it? This is damage control." Robert raised an eyebrow, a faint smile touching his lips. "Damage control?" he echoed, the words floating lightly, almost teasingly. "That's an interesting choice of phrase." Joy wasn't deterred. "Let's talk about your past, shall we?" she continued, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "The arrests, the rehab, the controversies. Do you really think you're the right person to be playing a hero for children? A man with your history? Do you believe parents want their kids looking up to someone like that?" The crowd collectively held its breath. You could feel the discomfort ripple through the studio. Whoopi shifted in her seat, clearly wanting to intervene. Sarah stared down at her cue cards. Alyssa pressed her lips together tightly. Everyone on that stage knew Joy had crossed an invisible line, and they were waiting to see how Downey would respond. For a long, tense second, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he exhaled, a calm, measured breath that seemed to reset the energy in the room. His gaze didn't waver. His posture didn't tense. If anything, he looked more relaxed than before, as if Joy's attack had merely given him a stage to make a point she wasn't ready for. "You know, Joy," he began softly, "I think there might be a misunderstanding here about what kind of conversation we're having today." That one line changed everything. The tone of his voice, controlled but commanding, made the audience lean in. Even Joy blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "I'm here," he continued, "and to talk about growth, about learning from your mistakes, about what it means to fall down hard and still get up again. If that's not something worth discussing, then maybe we're on different pages about what matters to people." Joy tried to interrupt, but Robert raised a hand gently, not dismissively but firmly enough to regain the floor. You see, the thing about being a public figure, he said, is that your failures aren't private. Everyone gets to see them, replay them, and judge them. But what people often forget is that failure isn't the end of the story. It's just the start of a better one, if you're willing to change. The audience began to clap softly. The tension was breaking, not in Joy's favor. Downey's voice grew steadier, warmer as he continued. I spent years rebuilding my life, not because I had to, but because I wanted to become the kind of man my son could look up to. The kind of man my fans could believe in again. And if you think that makes me unfit to play a hero, well, I guess we have different definitions of heroism. By now, Joy had leaned back in her chair, her smirk replaced by a tight, uneasy expression. The studio audience, fully on Downey's side, erupted in applause. Whoopi nodded approvingly, clearly impressed. Sarah smiled, visibly relieved that someone had managed to turn the energy around with such grace. Downey chuckled lightly, glancing toward the camera. You know, I've been called a lot of things in my life, some deserved, some not. But one thing I've learned is that you can't control how people see you. You can only control what you do next. The applause swelled again, this time louder, more genuine. Joy looked momentarily speechless. The power dynamic of the interview completely reversed. Downey had taken her attempt at humiliation and transformed it into a moment of inspiration. It was, in every sense of the word, a cinematic comeback. By the time the segment wrapped, Joy managed a strained smile and thanked him for coming. Downey nodded graciously, still composed, still kind. Pleasure's mine, he said simply, standing to another round of applause. As he exited the stage, the audience rose to their feet, leaving Joy sitting there, caught between disbelief and reluctant respect. In the end, it wasn't just a talk show segment. It was a lesson in dignity, restraint, and the quiet power of redemption. Robert Downey Jr. didn't just win that moment, he redefined it. And somewhere deep down, even Joy Behar must have realized that she hadn't just faced a celebrity that morning. She had faced a man who had mastered the art of turning pain into purpose and criticism into clarity. When Robert Downey Jr. sat across from Joy Behar on The View, he had no idea the morning would turn into one of the most talked-about television moments of his career. He hadn't come to spar, to argue, or to defend himself. He had come expecting a light-hearted conversation, the kind where smiles, laughter, and movie anecdotes carry the segment. When my publicist told me I'd be coming on The View, he began, a touch of humor still in his voice. I was under the impression this was going to be a friendly chat about my work. Maybe share a few laughs, the kind of thing your viewers tune in for. The audience chuckled softly, sensing the tension beneath the charm. But Joy Behar wasn't interested in easing the room. In fact, she seemed to feed on the discomfort. Her body leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on Robert like a prosecutor about to deliver the next blow. What Downey didn't realize, or perhaps he did, was that Joy had no intention of playing nice that morning. She wasn't interviewing him. She was building a case. Oh, come on, Robert, she said, her tone sharp, dismissive. You can't seriously expect to just waltz in here and pretend like your past doesn't matter. You were arrested multiple times. You went to prison. You had a serious drug problem that nearly destroyed your career, and probably your life. And now you want to just gloss over all of that because you've made a few successful movies? A stunned silence fell across the studio. Even the hum of cameras seemed to fade. The audience, moments ago full of excitement, now sat frozen in their seats. There were no laughs, no polite coughs, just the heavy weight of her accusation hanging in the air like thick smoke. Whoopi Goldberg glanced at the floor, clearly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes shifted uneasily, clutching her cue cards a little too tightly. Alyssa Farrah Griffin looked toward the producers as if silently asking, "Are we really doing this?" But Joy didn't stop. She had made up her mind that this would be her moment, the one where she held a Hollywood icon accountable, even if it meant crossing every line of decency to do it. Robert Downey Jr. didn't interrupt. He didn't frown or fire back. He simply nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. To the casual eye, it might have looked like submission, like he was accepting her verbal barrage. But anyone who knew Robert knew better. The man who had rebuilt himself from the ruins of addiction didn't break easily anymore. Beneath that calm exterior, something sharp and resolute was stirring. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, softer than before. But there was a gravity to it that made everyone listen. "I see what's happening here," he said, his gaze fixed firmly on Joy. His tone wasn't angry. It was observational, almost surgical. You've decided that this is going to be some kind of gotcha moment, haven't you? You think you can sit there and tear apart someone's lowest moments, drag them out under studio lights and call it journalism? Joy blinked, visibly taken aback by the directness of his words. The audience let out a collective breath as if realizing for the first time that they were watching something far more raw than a morning talk show. They were witnessing a reckoning. Robert leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but edged with quiet intensity. Let me ask you something, Joy. When was the last time you made a mistake? Said something you regret? Did something you wish you could take back? He paused, letting the question sink in. Now imagine if that moment, your worst moment, was the only thing people ever wanted to talk to you about. Imagine if every time you tried to move forward, someone dragged you back to that same dark place. You could have heard a pin drop. This, he continued, gesturing slightly toward her, is what happens when people mistake gossip for honesty. You think you're being bold, you think you're being fearless, but all you're really doing is reopening old wounds that took years to heal. Joy crossed her arms, visibly irritated but saying nothing. For the first time since the segment began, she didn't have a ready comeback. Robert's voice softened again, but the undercurrent of strength remained. I don't hide my past. I've spoken about it openly, not because I'm proud of it, but because I believe in the power of change. You bring up my arrests, my addiction, my failures as if I haven't already faced them 1,000 times. Trust me, Joy, I have. In courtrooms, in interviews, in my own mirror. I've had every reason to give up, but I didn't, and that's the part you're missing. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. A few people even began to clap before catching themselves, unsure if it was appropriate to break the silence. Downey leaned back again, that calm composure returning to his face. The truth is, I didn't just make some successful movies, as you put it, he said. I rebuilt my life from nothing. I earned back the trust of people who had every reason to doubt me. I didn't wake up one day and decide to pretend the past didn't happen. I chose to learn from it, to grow, to be better. He looked out toward the audience for a moment before turning back to Joy. And you know what? That's what I think being a hero really is. It's not about wearing armor or saving the world. It's about facing your demons and refusing to let them define who you are forever. The crowd erupted into applause. Not polite this time, but full and genuine. Even Whoopi couldn't help but nod approvingly. The camera panned to Joy, who looked caught between defiance and reflection. She opened her mouth as if to reply, but no words came out. Robert smiled faintly. I came here today to talk about my work, about creativity, about second chances. But if we're going to talk about my past, then let's make it mean something. Because I didn't come this far to let anyone on this stage or anywhere else reduce my life to a list of mistakes. Another wave of applause filled the studio. It wasn't just for the words. It was for the grace, the courage, the calm strength with which he had turned an ambush into an awakening. As the camera zoomed in on Robert's face, there was a glimmer in his eyes, not anger but clarity. We all fall, Joy, he said quietly. The difference is what you do when you get back up. That final line hung in the air like a gavel. The applause became a standing ovation. Joy Behar, visibly rattled, forced a small smile and turned toward the camera. We'll be right back after this, she said, her voice almost trembling. The segment cut to commercial, but the energy in the room didn't fade. Viewers across the nation would later say that moment was one of the most powerful live TV exchanges they'd ever seen. Not because of the confrontation, but because of how Robert Downey Jr. handled it. With poise, with humility, with the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. And as the credits rolled later that day, one truth remained undeniable. Joy Behar had tried to corner a man about his past. And instead, he gave her a masterclass in redemption, integrity, and what true heroism looks like when the cameras are rolling. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Every camera, every light, every silent audience member seemed to be holding its breath. The energy was thick, the kind of heavy electric silence that only happens when someone speaks a truth too sharp to ignore. Robert Downey Jr. leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady, his tone firm but calm. The voice of a man who had spent years learning how to rise above chaos. You've taken someone's recovery journey, he said slowly, his words landing with precision. Their struggle to become a better person. and tried to turn it into a weapon against them. And frankly, Joy, that says a lot more about you than it does about me. The air seemed to crackle. The studio was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the cameras and the faint rustle of someone shifting in their seat. Joy Behar's confident posture had faltered. For the first time that morning, her expression revealed uncertainty. She had pushed too hard, too far, and now the balance of power had shifted completely. Joy tried to recover, fumbling for composure. "I think you're being unfair to my intentions here, Robert," she said quickly, forcing a chuckle that didn't quite land. The View has always been about having honest conversations about difficult topics. Robert nodded slowly, thoughtfully, not mocking, not dismissive. He seemed to consider her words carefully before responding, as though giving her the benefit of the doubt. "Honest conversations about difficult topics," he repeated softly, letting the phrase linger in the air. "That's interesting. You know what would be an honest conversation about a difficult topic, Joy?" He paused for a moment, his tone perfectly measured. "It would be talking about how addiction affects families, discussing the challenges of recovery, exploring how society can better support people who are trying to turn their lives around. That would be honest. That would be meaningful." He leaned back slightly, his expression calm but unflinching. "But that's not what happened here, is it?" His voice was gentle now, almost conversational, and yet somehow that made his words cut deeper. "What happened here," he continued, "is that you saw an opportunity to score points against someone you perceived as vulnerable, and you took it. You thought you could ambush me with my past mistakes and—" "What exactly? Make me cry? Make me defensive? Force me to apologize again for things I've already addressed and made amends for?" There was no anger in his tone, just clarity. It was that clarity that made everyone in the room uncomfortable, especially Joy. Her smile wavered. She shifted in her chair. Her gaze darted toward Whoopi, toward the camera crew, toward anyone who might throw her a lifeline. But no one moved. The co-host sat in stunned silence. Even Whoopi Goldberg, who had seen her fair share of tense on-air moments, looked like she wanted to fade into the background. "Robert, I really think you're mischaracterizing my approach here," Joy said, her voice tighter now, more defensive. "I'm simply trying to have a candid discussion." Robert nodded again, but this time his expression changed. There was something almost pitying in his eyes. "A candid discussion," he echoed softly. "Joy, let me ask you something." He tilted his head, studying her like a man trying to understand a puzzle that doesn't quite make sense. "How many other guests have you treated this way? How many people have walked onto this stage expecting a professional interview, a fair conversation, only to find themselves being attacked for their personal struggles? Because I have to tell you, if this is your idea of a candid discussion, I think your viewers deserve better." The words landed like a thunderclap. The camera zoomed in on Joy's face, capturing every flicker of emotion, the disbelief, the irritation, the creeping realization that she was being completely outmatched. She had gone in expecting a defensive, fragile celebrity who would stumble and stutter under pressure. Instead, she was sitting across from a man who had faced down his own demons and come out sharper, wiser, and infinitely more composed. Robert continued, his voice gaining quiet strength with each word. "Furthermore," he said, "let's talk about the hypocrisy of what you're doing here." Joy's eyes widened slightly. She tried to interject, but he held up a hand, polite but firm. "No, hear me out," he said, his voice steady but with an unmistakable edge. "You sit on this show every day and talk about compassion, about understanding, about giving people second chances. You advocate for rehabilitation over punishment, for treating addiction as a health issue rather than a moral failing." He paused, letting the truth of his words hang in the air. "And yet here you are, doing the very thing you claim to stand against. You're using someone's lowest moments as a weapon for ratings. You're dressing up judgment as journalism." You could feel the energy in the studio shift again, this time completely in his favor. The audience, who had started the interview unsure of what to think, now leaned toward him emotionally, silently cheering him on. Even through the cameras, viewers at home would later say they felt it, that electric moment when the hunter became the hunted, when the narrative flipped in real time. Joy blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing without words. For a split second it looked as though she might apologize, but pride held her back. Instead, she forced a stiff smile. "Robert," she said carefully, "I think you're reading too much into this." But Downey wasn't finished. His tone softened again, but his words were deliberate, each one chosen with precision. "Joy, I've spent a lot of years learning to take responsibility for my actions," he said. "That's what recovery is. You own your mistakes, you face the consequences, and you work every single day to be better. But what you're doing right now, it's not accountability. It's entertainment disguised as moral superiority." The applause started quietly this time. A few people at first, then more. Within seconds, it spread across the studio like a wave. Robert didn't acknowledge it. He didn't need to. His eyes stayed on Joy, steady and unflinching. "You see," he added finally, his voice low but powerful, "people don't need to be reminded of their worst moments to grow. They need to be reminded that redemption is possible. That's the kind of story worth telling. That's the kind of honesty people actually respond to." When he finished speaking, Joy Behar sat motionless. The applause grew louder, echoing through the studio. The cameras caught every detail. The uneasy smile she forced, the way her fingers drummed nervously against the desk, the flash of realization that she had lost control of her own show. Whoopi, breaking the tension at last, turned to the audience with a wry smile and said, "Well, I think that's what you call a real conversation." Laughter erupted, and even Robert allowed himself a small grin. But the message had already landed, sharp, clear, unforgettable. When the segment ended, social media would explode with clips of the exchange. Viewers would praise Downey for his grace, his eloquence, his refusal to be bullied into shame. Commentators would call it one of the most composed live television comebacks in recent memory. And Joy Behar, she would sit quietly through the commercial break, replaying his words in her head, realizing that she hadn't just lost an argument, she had been given a mirror. Because in that studio, under those bright lights, Robert Downey Jr. hadn't just defended himself. He had reminded millions of people watching that dignity doesn't mean silence, and redemption doesn't mean forgetting. It means standing tall, even when someone tries to drag you back into the shadows you fought so hard to escape.